Good evening and welcome to our systems webinar with Bronwyn Reid. So, pretty exciting tonight. I know my own business systems are a huge issue. Getting them right is a lot of work and not much fun. And if you don't do it right, it's a mess. So it's great to have someone like Bronwyn on who can give us a hand and point us in the right direction, make sure that we use systems the right way and tame the chaos in our business. So without further ado, introducing Bronwyn Reid from Mining for Business.
Okay, thanks Dallas, and welcome everyone to this evening's webinar. What we're going to talk about tonight is how to create and document good business systems. Doesn't sound very exciting, but along the way there'll be some mathematical formulae, there'll be some semi-naked men, and we'll even have some classical music. All in my quest to convince you that systemizing your business is actually really exciting and sexy stuff. So what I'm going to try and cover off on is the actual steps that you as a business owner need to take. I met up with Ronsley the Sunday before last and we were talking about what I was trying to do. And Ronsley came up with an excellent analogy for me. We're all told and we all know that we should systemize our businesses, but that's a bit like Ronsley telling us to eat healthy. But how do I actually do that? What steps do I actually take? So that's what I want to get into, at least in an introductory way tonight. What we're trying to get to is to solve that issue where you just wish you could plug a USB stick into your head and download everything that's in there. Well, we can't quite achieve that, but I think we can do the next best thing. So the first thing I wanted to do is back up a little bit and talk about what I mean by business systems and what business systems are and what they're not, more importantly. First of all, you all do have business systems. They may be rudimentary and they may not be documented yet, but they're presumably there because something's getting done in your business. So we'll start off with a few important things about documented business systems. Now I'm going to assume a level of, sorry about that, I'm going to assume a level of business maturity in this group tonight. And I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail about why you need documented business systems because I know you know that, you've all got it, you're all over that. You might not have done it already, but at least you're on the page of why it needs to be done. When I work with clients, I break this down simply into the 5 C's. The first one is compliance. Now, in my land of small companies dealing with large companies, one of the first things that they have to deal with is compliance. They have to comply with all the pre-qualification requirements. If they don't have them, they're just not going to get anywhere. So the first C is compliance. Second is consistency. Our customers don't want surprises. And that's what we're all striving to do with KPIs, is to provide that complete and remarkable solution each and every time. The third one is cost. We look to control costs by eliminating rework, eliminating waste, eliminating rejects. Number 4 is control, and this is where I think some of you will be. This is where you're saying to yourself, oh, if I could just do it right, or I just might as well do it myself because no one else can do it the same as I can, or I just can't even get out of the office and turn the clock every night. I've just got to do everything. By documenting your business systems, you're working to get yourself back in the control seat. So your people will know what to do, how to do it, when to do it, and importantly, why to do it. The last C is one that a lot of us don't think about. Certainly a lot of us don't think about in the first flush of excitement when we kick off our businesses. That's the creating value. Now, Jeff Green, one of the other KPIs, he's an expert in this area, and I know that Jeff would agree with me that one of the main benefits of documenting your business systems is creating value for when you do that when you finally do want to exit. Prospective buyers will buy two things: cash flow and systems. And Elizabeth Gillum, who works extensively with franchisees. I've had some conversations with Elizabeth, and she tells me that the value of a franchise is directly correlated to the ease of implementation of their systems. And there, of course, the example that we all think about is, you can think about is McDonald's. Now, quickly, I want to run through what I'm talking about, what systems are. First of all, they consist of living documents. Now, these documents, they're updated as often as necessary as things in the business change, and they're used by everybody. They must capture what everybody does and uses every day. That's the how we do things around here. The independent test is if you could take somebody who's never performed that task before and have them do it to an acceptable standard. So if Elizabeth Gillum installed me in a brand new food franchise, I should be able to turn out food for customers that satisfy their requirements. Systems are a set of building blocks that you'll create and put together, and that all together they describe exactly how your business operates. McKinsey uses this definition, and I think it sums it up. Systems are all the steps involved in creating and delivering a company's product. Okay, so that's what systems are. Now, I want to be really clear on what systems are not. And what they are not is a great big folder of documents that's been printed out and then sits on the shelf that nobody ever touches again. And I see this just so often. I was in a workshop just last week with some business owners, and one lady told me that she paid a consultant $6,000 to do her health and safety system. It was on the desk the next morning, absolutely no context at all, nothing to do with her business. And quite frankly, she's not complying with the law by doing that. Another really good example of that I have is out here in central Queensland when we had the floods in 2008. The environmental consultancy that I'm a director of was assisting with modelling of the floodwaters and where the floodwaters were going to go. Now, we were told there was supposedly a flood emergency system which described all the actions that should be taken at certain river levels and who was to be contacted and who had the responsibility of doing what. The only problem was that when it came for it to actually flood and the actual water was entering the actual town, nobody could actually find the flood management systems manual. Then when it was eventually found, it was so out of date, it was useless. So everyone who was trying to manage the flood situation was back to first principles, trying to figure out what to do next and who to contact and to try and manage what was developing rapidly into a critical and potentially life-threatening situation. Elizabeth, who I said, as we all know, folks with food franchises, also gave me a different take on this. As you know, when you buy a food franchise, you buy all the systems that go with it. And she related the example of one food franchise that had a log for refrigerator temperature, a log for food temperature, a log for cleaning, a log for this, a log for that. Now, picture a food franchisee working in a 2 metre by 3 metre space in the middle of a shopping centre. Where on earth are they even going to store all these logs? So the result was, of course, that people just didn't use them. The next thing they're not, or shouldn't be, is boring. I've seen so many documented systems that seem to have been purposely designed to send any sane person to sleep. They use really complex and indecipherable language. So the language they use must be appropriate, it must be understandable, and it must be user-friendly. The next thing that systems cannot be is imposed from the top. Now, these last 2 points pretty much go together. If a business system is imposed from the top without reference to and input from the people who actually do it, it will almost always be ignored. People will just make up their own way around it. It's just as a river will find its own way around an obstacle, people will find a way around inappropriate systems. And I heard a good one of these yesterday at a business breakfast I was at. The lady I was speaking to is a mental health worker, and her area covers 60,000 square kilometres. It's huge. And she has KPIs around her client contact time, but she's not allowed to include travel time as contact time. So the logical answer to her was to use Skype. But when she tried to do that, somebody on high has decided that they're not allowed to install Skype on their work laptops. So what did she do? She installed Skype on her work iPad. Technically legal, but certainly working her way around the system. One point I just want to make briefly here is, I'd like you to separate in your mind the business system from the technology used to document it. Now, we'll talk later about electronic management of business systems, but we could easily use a pencil and paper. It wouldn't be very efficient, but we could. Same system, but different technology. Right, now we start to get a bit technical, but I want you to hang in there. We saw before that a system is all the steps in creating and delivering a company's product. We can think of the business itself as the whole system. But then within that whole system, you'll have several subsystems. So you've got a purchasing system, a lead generation system, a finance system, a health and safety system, and so on. Now, all of those systems work together to create the whole of the business that's XYZ Proprietary Limited or your business. They're the building blocks that I spoke about earlier. Now we break it down a bit further. Each of those systems and subsystems can be broken down into a number of processes, and I'll use an example here. If we look at the finance system, there'll be a process called pay bills or pay invoices. The paying bills process will be made up of a number of tasks. The first of which may be open up the internet banking portal and create the payment. The second task to mark the bill as paid in the accounting software. The third task to print off a report or something else. What we're trying to get to with all of this is to document every single one of those tasks, actually write down how it's done. We then have to identify all the resources needed for that task. So there may be some forms, scripts, reference manuals, spreadsheets, dashboards, etc. And they all need to be accumulated with the documented procedure. Now, that all seems like a really big task, enormous, when we talk about it. And yes, it is. I'm not going to pretend that it's easy, because it's not. Implementing business systems, doing a complete business systemization is a major organizational change. And it's your responsibility as the business owner to recognize it, and recognize that if you don't do it well, because you're the engineer and the owner of the business, if you don't go about it well, it can very easily fail. Now, I said I was going to give you some practical advice tonight, so here comes the first slide. Systems projects fail typically for three main reasons. Number one, the leadership isn't capable of leading the change. There's top-down implementation and the team is not involved. So like the guy in this slide, one-way communication from the top down is just not going to cut it. Second one, the change takes too long. There's no set timeline for the project and people lose enthusiasm and they lose heart. Third one, not setting measurable goals for your systems. As with anything in our business, you need to measure, report and refine. Just doing the documents according to what we're talking about tonight isn't the end of the line. If we're not measuring and continually improving, that's not a great improvement on not starting at all. The next piece of practical advice I want to impart is when. When should you start creating and documenting your business systems? And the easy answer is now, before you realise that you have to. We're all busy as business owners. Some of us are in startup mode, some have mature businesses, but we're all busy. And often the things that aren't shiny or new and exciting and sexy, or that are absolutely in our face and glaringly desperate, slip to the bottom of the pile. This picture here could very easily be a picture of me when I first started my journey to systemizing my business in earnest. I was literally sitting in the office at 11:30 one night in tears, sobbing, as I was trying to get all these documents together for a Rio Tinto tender, and nothing would work. The hyperlinks weren't working. I couldn't find the right documents I needed, and I really, really needed that Rio Tinto work too. So that was when I started my own personal business journey to find a solution, so I didn't ever have to be in that situation again. My life would have been a whole lot easier if I'd started my journey earlier, but no, I had to reach the point of maximum pain at 11:30 p.m. at night in my office, sobbing, before I got sufficient motivation to actually get on and do it. Continuing on our theme of practical advice, I'm going to now walk you through some of the objections that you will get when you start on your business systems journey. As I said before, the number one success factor is that you need to have your team on board. So if you're a solopreneur, that's great. You're the only person you've got to convince. If you're not, I'm going to show you the main obstacles that are going to be thrown up at you. In our own company, we call these pushback, and believe me, we've seen them all. I wanted to go into more detail on these with strategies to counter them, but when I rehearsed this presentation, it just made the webinar go way over time. And I realised that that's actually a whole webinar in itself, just there. So for tonight, I'm just going to point them out so that you know to watch out for them. The first one is, I'm too busy. I'm too busy to do all that. And I see a lot of business owners themselves in this mode. I'm just too busy to write all this stuff down. I'm too busy trying to earn money to do all this. And this is a vicious circle. You're too busy, so things get done in a way that that person interprets as the best way. These are what I call uncontrolled design changes. You all know them. Then somebody has to fix the uncontrolled design changes, so they're even busier, which leads to less and less control and even worse outcomes, and so it goes around. I actually heard a dreadful story about an uncontrolled design change last week in a workshop, and it involved a vintage timber yacht at the bottom of the harbour due to an uncontrolled design change of a bilge pump, and I don't think it ended well. The next objection is it's too hard. Yes, it is hard, and there's a lot of work up in the upfront bit. But anyone who starts and runs their own business, like everyone who's on this call tonight, you know there's a lot of work involved in getting anything done. Think about your website. Your was a lot of work when you started doing your website, when you started developing your ATM, when you started developing your product, and even your pitch. And if you let that turn you off, you would never have started your business at all. So it doesn't have to, yes, it's hard, but it doesn't have to be impossible. And we'll walk through some pain reduction techniques later. The next pushback you'll get is, I'm an expert. I know what I'm doing. I don't need a documented procedure to tell me what to do. The subtext that's happening here is that your experts perceive that you documenting what they do as belittling. So you need to work, you have to work around that. The next objection is, oh, I've done this 1,000 times. I know what to do. I don't need to write it down. I'm so, I've done it 1,000 times before. This is a little bit of a variance on the, oh, I'm an expert thing. But I personally would not like the airline pilot to leave the takeoff checklist in the departure lounge saying, oh, I've done this 1,000 times. I know exactly what to do. Because we all know that things could get forgotten, things do get forgotten, the phone rings, somebody asks us a question, life just goes wrong sometimes. My mum at one point was flying in a private aircraft and the pilot didn't follow the checklist. With this particular aircraft, they used a hook on the front wheel to drag it out of the hangar. And because the pilot skipped the pre-flight checklist, he didn't take that hook off the front tyre. So, of course, as soon as they were starting to get airborne, the propeller hit that steel hook on the front wheel, and he had to make a pretty hairy landing. Fortunately, they were okay, and my mum was okay, but that particular incident certainly sticks in my mind. This was also an issue in our environmental consultancy, and it just drove me insane. Every morning before the environmental scientists would have to go out in the field to do their monitoring work, they'd have to pack the vehicles with all the equipment. And we were constantly getting a phone call. Oh, I forgot to pack something. Can somebody run it out to me? Or they would leave the office and then be back in half an hour because they'd forgotten something. It drove me nuts. I'd supposedly employed tertiary trained intelligent people but they couldn't seem to remember 6 or 10 things to put in the darn vehicle. So we did a deep dive into the problem. We finished up creating some simple checklists. From my recollection, there's only been 1 or 2 incidents of forgotten equipment since we implemented those checklists. In some cases, team members will see it as decreasing their power base. This is the person who's been with you for 20 years and knows everything. No one can do that particular job except for Joe, or Joe always negotiates with that customer. By asking that person to document what it is that they do, that can very much be seen as decreasing and eroding their power base. But you as the business owner are addressing a critical risk by tackling that one head on. The next one you'll get is systems of written procedures that just stifles my creativity. They restrict my freedom. How can I be creative and do my thing if I'm restricted by a procedure? The reality is that by acting as like a team of experts at your back and giving you direction you don't have to think about, your mind is actually being given time and freed up to concentrate on the creative stuff. So having written procedures actually liberates rather than restricts. I'd like you to listen to a short video clip. I'll start that. Now, I hope that the technology hasn't failed me and everybody could hear that. I don't think anyone in any universe could say that Johann Sebastian Bach was not creative. To me, that's one of the most beautiful pieces of music. But that wonderful creative expression actually follows rules. There's rules of composition. And I'm pretty sure there'll be people on the call tonight who are musically trained, who know those rules of composition. But for those of us who don't know the rules, we just hear that beautiful end result, that beautiful creative end result. So we can't really accept an argument that systems restrict creativity. So now we're going to delve into how we actually do this. What I've found is that there's lots and lots of information out there in the blogosphere on the advantages of systems and why we all should have business systems. But I've found that there's very, very little about how to actually do it. So what I've devised is 7 steps that, from my experience, I think cover off on the actual implementation phases. That's creating and documenting your business systems. And it's this that I help business owners with. It's actually stepping with them through these 7 steps and getting it done. First step is pre-planning, and this is a solo activity. Again, everyone in this group I know will already have your business vision, mission, your why, your value statements, and everyone on your team will share those. And this is incredibly important because without that, you've got nothing to guide you as to the outcome of your systems. And again, I'll give an example here from our environmental consultancy. One of our driving values is scientific accuracy. We pride ourselves on 100% accuracy in our data management and our reporting to our clients. That desired outcome drives everything that's contained in our systems. It drives who we hire, it drives the type of equipment we buy, the type of quotes and invoices we send out, the way we check data and reports. If we didn't care what level of accuracy the client got, and believe me, there are some companies for whom that is the case, we'd be able to just go and hire some backpackers and we could get rid of a whole raft of data checking procedures and data management procedures. We could just get the data back from the lab or our field tests and ship it off to the client's email and end of story. So it's vitally important that you have those vision, mission, values, why, whatever value proposition in mind, and that the team shares that with you before you start on this journey. So the pre-planning stage is where you, as the business owner, start wandering around and noting what you do. A notebook's good, or voice memo on your iPhone. I also use an on-screen timer. I think it's called egg.timer, to actually start measuring and documenting what you do as a business owner. The reason this is so important is because you're going to ask other people to do it later. And if you haven't done it yourself, you're going to be really hard pressed to ask other people to do it and advise them. So wander around with a notebook, write down what it is you do during the day, or use some sort of time management software. And it's very important that you do this because this is your first step into systems thinking. The next step is getting the whole team into systems thinking. So this is a team activity. What you're going to do here is start getting the team on board and sharing your systems thinking. Now, I've already given you some of the objections that you're going to get at this stage, and this is where you need to start bringing in your answers. Our aim here is to have everybody thinking of the business as a well-oiled machine, and using an analogy is good. Something that relates to your business, if you can come up with one. A good standby is the analogy of a car with all its subsystems. It's got an engine, it's got a braking system, exhaust system, air conditioning system, steering system, and each part has to be working at its best for you to get to your destination faster, safe, and cost effectively. Now, there's all types of different types of learners out there. So for the mathematically inclined, let's look at it this way. This formula is from the Six Sigma methodology. And if you haven't heard of that before, don't worry, just stick with me for a while. Y is your output. That's what you do, your complete and remarkable solution. X is the resources you use, the people, the equipment, the machines, the money. F stands for function, and that's the processes. That's the procedures, the checklists, the resource, and those other resources, and the way you work on the resources at your disposal. Now, E represents the errors. In normal Six Sigma literature, you will see plus E, not minus E, but I've taken the liberty of changing this to minus E to emphasize that the errors take away from your output. So anyone that breaks into cold sweats at the sight of a mathematical equation, take comfort, it's really not all that hard. Write this up on your whiteboard at work, explain to your team what it means, and then leave it there for them to ponder. And I find that leaving it on surfaces where everyone goes for coffee is useful, then they can't avoid it. Another way you can illustrate this for the visual learners is by visualizing two factories. The make it factory and the fix it factory. Now you need to run the make it factory, but if you're running the fix it factory as well, you're wasting time, money, and probably emotional energy repairing all the bad outcomes. It's also vitally important at this time that the team starts thinking of the whole business as a machine, not just their individual silos. And we'll see later how process outcome objectives can actually be in conflict. So we have to have in the back of our mind the optimal performance of the whole system. So stepping on, the next step is we take a helicopter view of your business. Step away, and again, this is a team activity. This needs to be done in group sessions, and they need to have a very high priority and not be interrupted. So everyone's minds needs to be concentrated. In these sessions, what you're going to do is take an overall view of your business. Identify all the bits and how they fit together. Remember the Lego blocks from the earlier slide? Here we start brainstorming what systems and what processes do we have, and what is the objective of those processes. Now, a really good way to do this is use a big whiteboard and coloured sticky notes, and then colour code each of the different systems that you identify. So finance might be green and admin yellow, operations pink or whatever. Now this will probably need to be done over several meetings and leaving at least an hour for the first one, because it might take a while for everyone to get into the mood. An example of what this might look like, this is a very neat example. Every business is going to have a human resources system. So now you need to identify all the processes that make up the HR system and give them a name. We spoke about giving an objective to each of those processes. Well, sometimes the objectives of two processes can actually be in conflict. As an example, we aim to get a certain type of report out in 5 days. That's the objective of one process, and we measure and report on that. At the same time, we have a report checking process with a desired outcome of 100% accuracy. Now, the two are in conflict. We could send the report out in 1 day, but it may not be 100% accurate. So you can see that it's very important that the whole team be involved and start thinking outside their silos and identify where the linkages and possible conflicts arise. Right, here's the half-naked man. The next step is to prioritise. In the previous step, you will have come up with a great big mess on your whiteboard of all the systems and all the processes that you and your team think that you've got in your business. So where do you start? It all just looks so overwhelming. What you need to do here is start with the things that drive you nuts, your real pain points. And as I said, there's the semi-naked man. I've already told you what one of my pain points was, and that was the people going out into the field to do field work and then forgetting some of the equipment. It was costing a lot of money. So what you need to do here is think of just, say, 10 to 20 real pain points in your business. What are the things that are really costing you the most time and dollars? Think of Pareto principle. Mostly, 20% of the sticky notes on your board will be causing you 80% of your problems. If that's a bit abstract for you, try this approach. Create a document like this one with all the systems and subsystems you've identified, and then score them. If they're critical to your business, give them a score of 3. If there'd be a big payoff for getting it right, but they're not necessarily critical, give them a 3 as well. If they're a bottleneck, or there's something that just drives you nuts, give them a 2. And if it's just an easy win, and we all know how important the power of small and quick wins is, give them a 1. At the end, add up all the scores, and hey presto, there's your priorities, right there in the right-hand column. The next step is flowcharting. Flowcharting can be as easy or as difficult as you want to make it. Now, if you don't know how to do flowcharting, just go to Google or go to YouTube. There's lots and lots and lots of resources. You can use a whiteboard and then photograph it, use butcher's paper and markers or sticky notes on a wall, or there's lots and lots of software available, whatever's most convenient for you. So I'm not going to tell you how to do it, just go to Google or YouTube. There are flowcharts are a visual representation of a process. There's a start, there's a finish, there's things to do, and there's decision points. And that's really all that you have to capture at this stage. You don't have to get too hung up on the detail. You can refine and refine later. If you get 80 or 90% of the process captured now, that'll do just fine. What I've just done here is a quick example, is a flowchart of the collections process. Now we get to the fun stuff, but it is important. If you let things flag now at the documenting stage, you will have wasted all your efforts to date. A lot of people want to jump right into this stage. This often, I see a lot of businesses trying to do this too. It reminds me of kids, when my kids were in primary school and I used to work with them in drama class. When you'd start, all they wanted to do was make the costumes and paint the sets and use the glitter and the face paint before they'd actually chosen what play to do or done any casting or anything else, learnt their lines. What we do for each of those processes, one at a time, we break it down into its component tasks. Then we document it. We actually start creating the documents at this stage. Just a Word document's fine at this point, because whatever technology we use, which we'll talk about later, if it's just down in Word, that's in the first instance, that's all we need to do. You need to decide who's going to be the project manager. Is it going to be you, or will you delegate to someone else? You need to make a template. In effect, a procedure for writing procedures. So you need to use consistent formatting, consistent fonts, bolding, colours, so that it's standard across everything. I personally, in my templates, like to have a purpose of the procedure, maybe some background information, who it applies to, and then the procedure. Do some yourself in the beginning. I always find it's easier to get people to provide feedback on something you've done rather than starting it from the ground up themselves. You're more likely to get suggestions for improvement if you provide a framework for people. Dot points are okay. Dot points are great. 95% of what you do will be simple dot points or 1, 2, 3 procedures. Don't assume any knowledge. We did an exercise in a workshop last week whereby each table had to write a procedure for sorting a deck of cards into the 4 suites and by card value, and you weren't allowed, you had to presume that the people who were going to read the procedure had never seen a deck of cards before. That's a really good exercise. Start with checklists. They're the easiest. Have a look around your business and see what things can be handled just with a simple checklist, because they're the easiest to do, and get those quick wins. If things have to be done in a particular order though, make sure you number them. At all costs, avoid rewriting War and Peace. Anyone who's come out of corporate land will know exactly what I'm talking about here. Every procedure reads like someone swallowed and then vomited up the management textbook. Just get to the point. Give your procedures short, descriptive titles. Think like a Google search. What would people look for if they went looking for it? Identify the resources. The forms, the scripts, the worksheets, the dashboards, the job descriptions. I remember from one of our KPI days, Glenn telling us that they have a 45,000 word script for use in the discovery sessions. So things like that would be included. Avoid duplication. Use hyperlinks. I see this a lot where several people have created a procedure for the same thing and they're all filed in a different place. So go back to your helicopter view, identify the places where your processes touch each other and the linkages. I used an example earlier of paying the bills on internet banking. Now, presumably, you're going to pay the wages and the tax office by internet banking as well. So it would make sense to have just one procedure for creating internet banking payments, not 3. Then if you change banks or the procedure changes, you only have to update 1 procedure, not 3. Set goals. Make sure you have a timeline for your project and set goals of maybe 1 procedure a week or 1 per month, whatever you feel you can cope with, and coordinate these with the project manager. The last step in our process is to refine and review. Once you've stepped through everything that you've identified in your team meetings and you've built a significant amount of documentation, don't think you're finished. At this point, we don't just print it all off and put it in a folder and stick it on the shelf. At this point, you've actually only just started. For each of those procedures that you've documented, it needs to be peer reviewed by getting someone else who's not familiar with the task to step through it using the procedure. Like Elizabeth Gillam doing to me, putting me in a food franchise and asking me to create something. We have a dashboard that we use for our monthly reports. Now, I'd always been the one to update that dashboard, and I then decided that would be a good task to outsource. So I went and I created a set of procedures that I thought was perfectly self-explanatory for my outsourced VA. But the very first time I sent it to Janet, she came back with about 10 questions asking what I meant. Now, I'd been doing that report for I don't know how many years. I knew exactly what I was talking about, but I hadn't proofed or field tested the procedures with someone else. And it wasn't until I sent it to Janice, and also she's English as a second language, so clearly my instructions were not quite clear enough. You need to build these procedures into your everyday activities. Everybody must follow the procedures. This is where the rubber meets the road, and this is where you'll see the bumps. In our office, if somebody asks a question, the first reply is, have you checked the procedure? This makes people think about what they're doing, and if they come across something that isn't documented, or if someone doesn't know how to do something, it gets documented. The flip side of enforcing the procedures, though, is that the team must be empowered to update. This is the release valve for changes, so that we don't get those undocumented design changes that I was talking about earlier. And this is the mistake that I commonly see in large organisations, such as big mining companies and government. Nobody is empowered. It all comes from the top. Yes, if there's significant changes, that needs to be brought back to a team meeting or a monthly meeting. If somebody finds a significant change is needed, it can be brought back to the team meeting, step back to the helicopter view, back to the flow charting, then review and revise. Then somebody should be allocated to rewrite, and then bring that rewritten procedure back for review. And then people will start using it and giving feedback. Schedule reviews and updates on a regular basis, just to make sure that everything is still as it should be. I like to set a target of reviewing procedures every 180 days. It doesn't always happen, don't always make that target, but that's the aim. And lastly, make sure that you inform people of the changes. You must have a good communication process so that everybody knows what has been changed. Now, this whole discussion started on Facebook when Carolyn Dean asked what people were using to document their systems. Now, from my wish list here, you will see that we're probably looking at a software solution, and indeed that is my very strong recommendation. Most of the items on the list are self-explanatory, so I won't spend time on those, except those last two. In my world of supplying to large organisations, you also need to be able to record who has created and who has approved documents. This is to comply with the formal systems that large organisations will require, especially if you start mapping to or being certified against international standards. Now, I know a lot of us are not in that position. However, I would still highly recommend that this be included in your system documentation. It ensures internal quality control of all of your documentation. Associated with authorization control is version control, being able to track versions. Again, I believe this is a really important quality control for yourself, knowing and tracking when the procedures have been updated and keeping some brief notes on why the changes were made. And I think this was also mentioned in the Facebook discussion about capturing the discussions about why things were being changed. Now, you can do all this in Word documents and other more manual documentation systems, absolutely, by using headers, footers, document properties, etc. But what I like to have is the ability to have automatic versioning, because that automatically ticks a whole heap of boxes for me. No one has to go and remember to update the header or footer, and there's no ambiguity about whether it's the last update and when it was updated. Is it the latest version? So as you all know, there's quite a few online collaboration tools that can be used now. So there's Evernote, Dropbox, Google Docs, Bittrex, and there's a whole host of others, all of which can be used to house all of your documents in the cloud. And there's been quite a lot of discussion in the Facebook group around the use of Google Docs. There's other software solutions that have been created specifically to contain systems and process documentation. There's quite a few out there, and I've just put a few of the names here. There's one called Sweet Process that William Peck pointed out to me. And it seems to be very checklist oriented. There's another one called Box Theory Gold, which seems to be heavily promoted. I personally haven't used it, but it does seem to be built on very sound principles. The one that I've used myself for over a decade now is called TKO, and I will include a link to that following the webinar. Just to declare, I do not have an interest in that company, but I have been using it for, as I said, over a decade. The developer is a regional Australian and he lives in regional Victoria, and the product won a Telstra Business Award. And it was that product that I found that night at 11:30 when I was Googling through my tears. For me, it has all the features that you need in a systems document management system, and it ticks all of those boxes from that previous slide. The other thing about it that I've found is it is very user appropriate, or user friendly, and you don't need the geeks in lab coats. And it's also very price appropriate for small business. The version that I like currently, it's not cloud-based, it's still server-based. But I know that a cloud version is coming. I've just seen too many systems where there's a whole nest of Word documents on a server somewhere, and oh, I know we wrote something about that somewhere, but I can't remember where we filed it. Where would we have filed that document? Is this the latest version? Or was this written by the subject expert? Or is this just a few notes that somebody filed in the same folder? I actually was talking to a health and safety systems auditor yesterday from New South Wales. He was auditing a coal mine, and he found an equipment, some sort of equipment checklist that has supposedly been an official document since 2002, but nobody that he spoke to had ever actually seen it. Having purpose-built software solution gets rid of all of that. And after all, that's what we're trying to achieve by implementing systems in the first place, is getting rid of the chaos. I've taken a couple of screenshots of TKO to show you the basic functionality. This is the opening screen, and here you'll enter your organisation details, set up the departments or the areas of your business, include all your roles and job descriptions, and you can set your key performance indicators. The guts of the program is here in the policies and procedures. You can see here on the left of the screen that everything is nicely organised into appropriate areas. There's the finance system, and it's broken down into the processes. Oops, I've lost my mouse. There it is. And those processes are further broken down into tasks, and each task is documented. You can see how I've got the consistent formatting of headers, subheaders. Every document is easily editable by clicking the edit button, and the editing environment is very familiar. It's just like a cut down version of Word. So the compromise there is that you can't have some of the fancy formatting that's available in other platforms. However, you can use the hyperlinks to link out to any other resource, which can be anything at all, a video, a spreadsheet, anything. Over here on the right is where the authorization and versioning is controlled. Every document has a unique number. Versions can be automatically updated, and notes relating to the version can be recorded. Another feature I really like is being able to run a report on what procedures are due for review. As I said, I like to have them reviewed every 180 days. and that will just run a quick report to see what you need to update or what needs review. Another feature I really like is being able to assign job roles to people and also assign policies and procedures to roles. It's a bit of a mouthful. So an environmental scientist has this job description, and these people are assigned to the role of environmental scientist here in our organisation tree. I can also assign procedures to that role. So these are the procedures that an environmental scientist will need to know. And the advantage of that is I can create a custom manual for the role of an environmental scientist. So that's a summary of my method for helping business owners get their systems under control. Now, I know everyone here on this call is familiar with Seth, and this was his blog post a few days ago, which is absolutely appropriate to this webinar. Why do you do it this way? If your employees can't answer how something they do helps the customer or contributes to the goals of the company, you've isolated people from their jobs. Their inability to answer this simple question might be because you haven't taken the time to teach your people how to think about the work you do. Or it might be because you're hiring people or rewarding people who don't want to think about your work. So, have we got any questions? We're right on time.
Well done, Bronwyn. That's excellent. That was really great. Yeah, happy to take any questions from anyone. Clark wants to know what the sexiest system is, and probably if there's any ones with good look, naked-looking guys on there by the sound of it.
I don't know that I can answer that question.
And Karen's asked, Bronwyn, does the system audit who makes the changes, or do staff just make a note of it? So is it registered by login, or do they just note their name?
Karen, you can set it up with logins if you want to. We don't. We just allow anybody to make editing changes, and then when you make a change, another box pops up, another window pops up, and asks you for who made the change and to put those few notes in about why it was made. So somebody has to authorize the change.
Great, thanks, Bronwyn. And Elizabeth has asked, how long does it take to implement systems into your business? Is this something we can do in a week or a month, or is it never ending like it probably feels like?
Oh boy, yes, it is never ending. Absolutely never ending. I have found that if you work absolutely flat out with an experienced person beside you, 6 months. And that's pushing it. My own personal journey took well nigh 2 years because before I felt I was at a decent stage of systemization and that I had the whole team on board and was comfortable and using systems as part of their everyday work. But that's because I was bumbling around by myself and testing technologies, and I had no one else to help me.
Yeah, you can certainly spend a lot of time going down the wrong path without the right guidance. Marie's just said that document control's come a long way since she worked in a document control department 30 years ago, and she had computers then.
Absolutely. I can sympathise with that. I can remember one of my first jobs. We used to get these documents from the government printer, and they would only print them every so often. So if there was any amendments, you had to literally cut and paste with scissors the new section and paste it in your old document. So yeah, document management has come a long way.
Was that cutting and pasting with scissors, or or mouse and keyboard?
No, that was with scissors and glue, Dallas.
Wow. Bronwyn, one question I have is, what about when you are too busy to make systems? Is there a way to sort of make them on the fly, or does that prevent you getting the helicopter level view that you need to make good systems?
Two parts to that answer. Start documenting everything you do now. Just as the business owner, that's that first step of the pre-planning. You can start jotting down those notes, but you do need to have the whole team on board and do that systems thinking and the helicopter view with the whole team. But that doesn't stop you starting to take notes and write things down now. And if you're in startup phase, strongly suggest start doing that immediately, or you'll finish up like me, 11:30 at night sobbing.
Terrific. Clark's just asked what system I use. So I partly use Word documents in Google Docs, and I use a project management and CRM tool called Work, etc., that has a built-in sort of wiki function and hierarchical task management. So we put a lot of our systems in there. But I think I need to spend 6 months with Bronwyn. I've got a lot to learn.
Happy to have you as a client, Dallas.
Terrific. All right, lovely. And so if anyone else, there's lots of thank yous coming in and some great comments. If anyone else has any other questions, let us know. Any wrap-up notes as to what we should go and do tomorrow while we're inspired, or right now, Bronwyn, what's the call to action for budding systems creators?
Okay, what you should do tomorrow is get that notebook or the work task timer on Google, or your voice memo recorder on your smartphone, and actually start doing that tomorrow, noting down what you do, really noting down what you do to start building. As I said, that's very important that you do that as the business owner, because otherwise you can't ask people to do it themselves, ask other people to do it later. And start thinking about the timeline.
Terrific. Thanks, Bronwyn. So we had a few people ask if the recording will be available because they're listening to the audio or the video. So definitely will be a recording. I believe it is live.
Dallas, I seem to have lost you.
Sorry, Bronwyn. Can you share your PowerPoint presentation?
Oh yes, of course. I can share my PowerPoint.
Terrific. So we'll email out a recording link and the PowerPoint presentation. Terrific. Well, thanks everyone for coming along. It's been great, and I've certainly learned a lot. Any other comments are well structured logic in the webinar, but it's a big process and can take a long time, but worthwhile. So thanks again, Bronwyn. Any parting words?
Yeah, thanks everyone for checking out tonight. Hope it's worked. I've been struggling all afternoon. And if anybody to chat to me about systems journey and how to start the systems journey, my contact details on that last slide. So, hope everybody took something away from tonight.
Great, thank you, and good night, everyone. Thanks, Bronwyn. You'll need to turn it off live.